Hey everybody, this is Perch. Here's one of these arguments that I see thrown out a lot, and maybe you know what I'm talking about, where a lot of the conversation you see on message boards, other places, comments, social media, etc. A lot of the arguments feels like people who really aren't listening at all to each other, or really not, really tackling, what the original person said, but rather just throwing out kind of random points. You're a man, baby. Racist. You just want all the comics to never change. You see those kinds of things thrown out, and they don't they're not thoughtful. They often do not actually even address the initial comments. Like, I didn't like this comic. Well, you're clearly a racist. Actually, the comic just had white people in it. There was actually, I said I didn't like it. So what is your argument, that I'm racist against white people? That I said I didn't like it, but I secretly did like it because there were only white people in the comic? Like, what is, you know what are you going with? And it just becomes a default. If you don't like a comic, or you say you don't like something about comics, there's lots that you can not like about comics. Like, hey, the way creators are often treated is garbage, particularly when they've moved out of the kind of 5 year zone of their popularity. Then and nobody gives a shit about them anymore, like we're seeing with Bill Lopes, Rachel Pollack, others. Comic publishers do a really poor job of helping them out. By the way, a big thank you to the folks at DC. I mean, actually, credit where credit's due. After making that statement, I want to retract a little bit of it. A couple people, including myself, rallied to try and get DC to send Rachel Pollack, who's currently, going through cancer, and it's quite rough, and serious. Wanted to get DC to send Rachel a copy of the omnibus that they're putting out for her run of Doom Patrol. Now, that omnibus is going to go, hit the street here fairly soon. But DC has some copies of it, and thought it'd be nice if she could get a copy of her omnibus, particularly since people were not entirely sure she would survive to see it hit the street. So, thought that would be a nice thing to do. So, a couple people rallied, and again, credit where credit's due. I want to specifically, several people tried to contact DC, said, hey, let's get a copy to her. DC did. So, thank you, DC, for that. And thank you to somebody who definitely gets a lot of criticism on YouTube. Thank you, Mark Wade, for helping in that effort. So thank you. That was the right thing to do. But in general, I guess my point here is, sorry, that brief distraction, but it's worth it. It's worth catching myself when I say something, and you got to point out the things that are good, and that was a good thing. The point I'm trying to make here is that people make arguments. It seems fairly regular, and by the way, all directions. It's if you say I like a particular comic, it's like you're not actually reading it. You're just saying you like it to try and score Twitter points or whatever. There's this kind of these default reactions to things that have made the entire bit of the conversation. Actually, it makes me miss a comic store all the more, because you wouldn't see that kind of disingenuous bullshit typically there. You'd see a whole different kind of bullshit, but it was a way more entertaining. Anyway, one of the arguments that I see come up, and it was recently kind of tossed against me. I said I didn't like that New Mutants 40th anniversary book. But the argument was, you don't want these characters to change. You don't want these characters to grow. That's the problem with a lot of critics of comic books. They just want comics the way they are, for one particular point in time. They want it frozen there in amber, and they don't want anything to change. And that I see that argument get tossed around quite a bit. Now, there is some truth to that. I think there are definitely people who have in their memory a era of comics, and usually it's the era when they came into comics. Like I started reading comics in the 80s, and 70s, late 70s, 80s, and the 80s is a fond memory to me. In part, I think, and I've thought about this a lot. In part because that was really when I started exploring a lot of different comics. So naturally, I was seeing a lot of ideas for the first time, and I have a lot of fond memories of that. No doubt about it. That is, somewhat unrelated to the quality of the comics. That's just about me. And all of you, the person listening to this, you have this too. You probably remember some of your first comics. You probably have fonder memories about those comics than you do current stuff. Some of that is the quality. Some of that is objectively the comics are different than they used to be. Not the characters, the comics. The art and the production, everything else is different. I mean, look at just the art in general, and the move from traditional kind of pen and ink, on paper to digital. There is a quality difference when you see the two. or maybe quality is a word that might trigger people, but just there's a difference. There's a visual difference between the two mediums. And it's not wrong to say, I prefer the old stuff versus new stuff. Doesn't make you a Luddite, doesn't make you hate technology or anything else. It's like saying, I like you know, I, I like Michelangelo versus Rembrandt. I just, there's differences in taste. But, the argument of you don't want these characters to change. I mean, part of my problem, quite bluntly, with Marvel in particular, a little bit with DC, but definitely Marvel, is that the characters are not changing. A lot of the characters are stuck in amber. They have not evolved. And what you see in comics today is you do not see a natural evolution in personality. A friend sent me a copy of the Immortal X-Men, the newest issue, which is tied up in this AXE thing. And the issue primarily features Nightcrawler. And Nightcrawler is behaving just fundamentally different from how he's behaved in the past. And it's not an evolution of the character. It's not like the character has grown and shifted and changed and everything else. It's just different. It's the character has a different personality. The character is acting just fundamentally different. That's not growth. That's the opposite. That's just using these characters as some kind of IP skin suit and just throwing whatever you want in there at various times. You look at Mr. Sinister as an example of a character who was written a certain way and then kind of evolved, had some different, ways that the character behaved. And then Kieran Gillen, during his original run, not the current run, but the original run on X-Men, just took Sinister in a completely new kind of silly, bizarre turn. Just bizarre. And Hickman, for whatever reason, decided that was the personality type of Sinister that he liked best, even though it contradicted tons and tons of comics. Now, in that case, are we saying, hey, Mr. Sinister's personality evolved, the character grew and changed, so this is, how he is now, fine? I don't think that works, because you didn't see any comics going from point A to point B. You just saw a character who was one way and the character who was a completely different way. It's like Wolverine for, decades has actually evolved quite a bit. If you look at the Chris Claremont run of X-Men at the very beginning, you look at his Storm, his Wolverine, in particular those two characters, but, Nightcrawler, Colossus, some of the others. But really, if you look at Kitty Pryde's another one who went through major change. But look at Storm, just as an example. Storm had, very long, tremendously well-written arcs where her character shifted. She battled, insecurity. She got more confident as a leader. She had, things where she slid back because of, her powers getting taken away, and then she had to find her footing again. Like, there's a lot that went on to Storm, and the character grew a lot, and it was really enjoyable to see that growth. For people reading comics, I do believe most people like to see characters evolve and change. What they don't like is when characters radically evolve and change. And I'll throw this out there that I'm sure several of you will disagree with. I think the Bobby Drake coming to terms with him being gay, as a character, potentially was an interesting storyline, and I think could have been landed as I think it could have taken. Now, Bobby, I don't believe, as some people point out, there were always signs. In fact, to the contrary, there were always signs the other direction. Bobby was immature. Bobby was flirting with girls. Bobby had several, pretty long-term, involved relationships and relationships where he grew as a character. But I think that you could have definitely put in the same work, the work that we saw, Claremont put into Storm, for example, meaning dozens of issues, lots and lots of comics, where Bobby Drake, something is just not right in how he's dealing with relationships. It never felt quite natural to him. He just, and then he goes on kind of a journey of self-discovery, and he discovers that, he has these feelings. He is gay. People still would have disliked it, no doubt about it. But imagine, if you will, 3 years, which used to be the blink of an eye in comics, but imagine 3 years of comics where they, a couple pages an issue, slowly built this, using thought bubbles, using kind of Bobby coming to this realization, understanding who he is, coming out to his teammates. This is, I think this is happening. This is who I am. etc. Um, I think, well, put it this way: yes, still people still would have complained, but I think a decent amount of people would have accepted that evolution of the character and would have said, hey, you did the work to get him there. And I think, quite frankly, if you are looking for LGBTQ representation in comics, that kind of stuff, you probably would. I would assume you would rather have stories like that one, where they put in the work, the time, the effort, and the energy to actually reveal this journey about the character and ultimately come out, than the way they did it, which was on one page in 9 panels. You had teenage Jean Grey go, "Hey, I read your mind, you're gay," and Bobby go, "What? No, I guess I am." Like that. That to me isn't character evolution. That's not growth. And I think that exists. This exact situation sums up the problem. It's certainly that I have with how a lot of this stuff is done. Now you can make lots of arguments. Oh, writers don't have the luxury of long arcs, so they can never do it today. Sure, but does that mean that instead we should get shortcut one-page character jumps? I mean, we should pick up an issue of X-Men and suddenly Nightcrawler's just has a different personality for no apparent fucking reason. I mean, even the recent Nightcrawler work that what's Cy Spurrier is doing that, right, in Legionnaires. Um, he's evolving and shifting in that comic, but it's a hell of a lot more accurate to the original, meaning the original, what growth from the original would look like. I think you look at Spurrier's Nightcrawler, and it's I mean I don't that comic is a tough one for me. I don't particularly enjoy it, but I definitely will say that he's trying to write Nightcrawler. He's trying to grow the character. Normally, he's trying to grow the character to new places, which that journey is exciting, and it's what I want to see from characters, as opposed to Gillen in this new issue, just like, oh, he completely acts and behaves and is different now. He's, that's different. That's not character growth. So I'm not speaking for everyone, but at least for myself, I like character growth, but the operative word there is growth. I like to watch it grow. I like to see it evolve. What I don't like is to pick up a comic and then a writer's like, I'm just going to change their personalities today for some reason. That's growth. That's not growth. What you saw in New Mutants was just characters with completely random personalities that do not fit the originals. In no way even makes you remotely think that the writer actually read any of the comics that they claim to write, read any of the comics they claim to read. It's like, I've got these characters and I vaguely kind of know their powers, so let's just have them do what I want them to do. That's not growth. And so we should stop pretending that is, or faking that that's some kind of, evolution of the character. It's not. It's just fucking around with it's skin suit IP. Let's see growth in comics. Like I said, I'm sure many of you will come and tell me I'm wrong about the Bobby Drake situation, but the key point there is having the character evolve, having the character grow into a change, a shift in their personality, etc., is wonderful. Comics used to do this more, and they still do in some cases. No, that's not like nobody does this anymore. But a lot of the outrage, and a lot of people who get angry and make these comments about what the hell is this, are often, pointing at things that come out of nowhere, where the character just shows up one issue and it's a completely different status quo change. And for what it's worth, people hated that in the 80s and the 90s too. Every now and then you'd get a character, it's like, the character's completely different now. Look, powers, like, it's different. Fans tended to reject that. Not because they're stuck in the past, but because they do not like jarring shifts that are completely unnatural to the characters that they're reading and buying. And I think that's normal. Anyway, let me know your thoughts in the comments below. Like and subscribe, and thanks for listening.